I recently fulfilled my lifelong dream of becoming an audio engineer at Harvest Records, a British record company. So far, everything has gone great. The staff are nice. The equipment used is top-notch. I feel quite honoured to work in the studio where great bands such as Pink Floyd, Deep Purple and Death Grips have been. However, there is one main reason why I picked Harvest Records over any other recording studio. The reason I applied here was so I could listen to the infamous record titled Melting Lady by Syd Barrett's short-lived band, Stars. In case you don't know about Syd Barrett or this mysterious album, let me give you some history. Syd Barrett used to be a member of the band Pink Floyd. He was on the band's first two records, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn and The Saucer Full of Secrets. However, after the release of The Saucer Full of Secrets, Barrett was developing schizophrenia and was starting to hallucinate things. His mental illness was getting in the way of live performances and recording new material, so he was forced to quit. He was replaced by David Gilmour. After Pink Floyd, Barrett released two solo albums for Harvest Records. One titled The Mad Cat Laughs, and the other was simply called Barrett. Barrett rarely toured for these albums. After the two solo albums, he decided to form a new band named Stars. The band would have Syd Barrett on guitar and vocals, Jack Monk on bass, and John Twink Alder on drums. Not much is known about this, other than a few live performances of doing covers, and a lost album that may or may not exist. Melting Lady was rumoured to be the title, and it was supposed to be filled with macabre songs. I was starting to ask my fellow co-workers about whether or not they'd listen to Melting Lady. They just ended up staring at me and walking away. They didn't even give a vocal response. Nick Harper, a man who's been working here for a long time, heard me talking about Melting Lady and approached me. "Are you sure you want to listen to that album?" Mr. Harper said. "Yes," I replied. "Well, looks like curiosity is gonna kill the cat. Follow me." I followed Mr. Harper to the storage room, shutting the door behind me. This was, thankfully, at a time when no employee needed to use the storage room. Mr. Harper pulled out a vinyl from a box. The cover of this album featured a woman sitting in her chair with her flesh melting off. This was drawn by Storm Thorson. This is easily his most disturbing artwork ever. Syd Barrett wrote all the songs to this album. He said he was guided by a very particular muse, said Mr. Harpo. He put the vinyl in a nearby record player, while I eagerly waited in anticipation. The first track was titled Jimmy the Goat. It was a light-hearted folk rock tune that had silly lyrics about some talking goat named Jimmy. In a way, it kind of reminds me of Yellow Submarine. The first two stanzas of the song are as follows. He's a friend of yours, he's a friend of mine. Time won't be a bore, he will make it fine. Jimmy the Goat. Da da da, Jimmy the Goat. Da da da, Jimmy the Goat. Da da da, Jimmy the Goat. Da da da. It seemed like a fun song you could listen to with your family, until the final two stanzas of the song came up. jumps off a cliff. The kids jump off a cliff. Jimmy only gets a bump. The kids only get death. Jimmy the goat, da-da-da. Jimmy the goat, da-da-da. Jimmy the goat, da-da-da. Jimmy the goat, da-da-da. Those last two stanzas had completely caught me off guard. At the time of hearing, I assumed it was Barrett's way of telling some surreal, dark comedy. I chuckled a little, with Mr. Harper looking at me like I'm some kind of crazy loon. The second and third track was literally one song just split in half. The tracks were titled Brain Damage and Eclipse. Now, you may remember these songs from Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, but as it turns out, this version is the original, and Pink Floyd covered it. Sid originally wanted to make a 6-track album, but we told him at least 7 tracks, so he split the song in half. Pink Floyd did the same thing in honour of him, informed Mr. Harper. I swayed to the song while Barrett sang about some lunatic in his head. The Pink Floyd version is better though, as the original is a bit dishevelled. The 4th track is titled Melting Lady. It features Barrett messing around with a Moog synthesizer, while the bass and drums are kept to a minimum. Here's a part of the song. Melting lady, oh melting lady, my sexy little melting lady, melting lady, oh melting lady, why are you melting away? This is your second shell. Please don't give me hell. Melting lady, oh melting lady, why are you melting away? The lyrics go on and on from there. The 5th track is titled God Hates Us. It was another folk rock song, but it was a little bit more menacing than Jimmy the Goat. The lyrics went as follows. I've seen heaven and hell, not one is much better. God hates us, God hates us. We die after we die. Humanity is a beast. God hates us, God hates us. These lyrics are repeated 3 times to this slow and ominous folk rock melody. Then, all of a sudden, it cuts to a chaotic and noisy instrumental. The instrumental was so loud and amateurish that it sounded like a middle school rock band. It was layered with loud shrieks coming from Sid Barrett. The shrieks almost sounded somewhat familiar to the shrieks in Suicide's Frankie Teardrop song. The 6th track was titled 2 Little Towers. It was a piano-driven piece with Sid Barrett playing the piano. Jack Monk trades his bass for a guitar on this one. It was a poppier track, even though the subject matter wasn't poppy at all. Here's the chorus. Towers crashing, towers crumbling, towers crashing, towers crumbling, tumbling down to the fountain. Tumbling down to the fountain. Pretty freaky, right? One verse in this song talks about how Barrett is going to die on July 7th, 2006, which he did. The other verse is about impending nuclear doom in the year 2030. The seventh and final track of this album is called Hell. It's a 17-minute track of 1,000 loud things going off at once. This thing was louder than anything Merzbow could come up with. I only listened to a minute and a half of it because the damn track is way too noisy. I took the vinyl off the record player and took a few deep breaths. God, I hate that track. The most I could listen to it was 5 minutes, commented Mr. Harper. He then told me a little bit more about the track. He said that Monk and Twink weren't present for this recording, so this is more of a Syd Barrett solo piece. He doesn't remember how Barrett created the sounds, or who produced it, and it remains a mystery to this day. He also talked about how, after the album was finished recording, the staff of Harvest Records at the time threw a listening party for it. None of the band was present for some reason. When the final track came on, everybody left the room immediately, except for 2 employees who dared each other to stay. Half an hour later, when the staff came back, they found the 2 employees fighting each other to death, with the most animalistic facial expressions. Rick, one of the 2 staying employees, pinned his staying friend, Chris, to the ground and pounded on his head until it was no more than blood and gush. Rick, to this day, is in a mental ward where he has never talked verbally and acts feral. Mr. Harper also talked about how, one time, Harvest Records was broken into and a bunch of records were stolen. The next week, the police responded to a murder-suicide that happened in a London home. It turns out that one of the inhabitants had stolen the records, and one of those records was Stars Melting Lady. Listening to that track in its entirety will make you go mad, said Mr. Harper. My shift was over, and I went home. I immediately Googled what had happened to the members of Stars. Syd Barrett lived the rest of his life as a recluse, and died on his predicted day. Not much is known about Jack Monk, but he is still alive. John Twink Alder converted to Islam, and changed his name to Muhammad Abdullah. Nothing too crazy happened to these guys after their breakup. But I have to say, listening to that album changed my life in a bad way, and I'm never going to forget it.